Welcome back to A People's Guide to Publishing. I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing and Distribution. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 25 years.
I'm Ellie Blue. I'm the editorial and marketing director here at Microcosm. We are an independent mid-list publisher based in Portland, Oregon, and Cleveland, Ohio. We have over 700 books, over 25 employees, and we make about 40 new books every year. And we distribute thousands of titles from other publishers.
We started this podcast so that we can share what we've learned with newer publishers so that you can learn from our mistakes.
Or maybe you just want to understand the publishing industry.
This week, we are going to answer a reader question.
Thanks, readers.
Which is, how do I make a contract for a book with multiple contributors?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a very good one. And I was surprised, because I always comb the archives when I get a question to send them the answer to their question that we answered a year or two ago. And indeed, we have not addressed this matter. So, excellent work. So, and I get, there's so many different ways to handle this, but there are a lot of best practices to keep in mind. So, we will highlight those,
You'll highlight those. I'm going to learn something here.
You're going to learn something.
I'm excited. I have learned something during these recordings, but today it's all going to be new to me.
Okay. Isn't everything you learn new to you?
Sometimes you're building on existing knowledge.
Okay. Various kinds of profundities, I guess. But so, first and foremost, every book you publish comes down to your P&L, which you can take a look at roughly 18 months ago, circa episode 50. We'll put the link in there. And, and so sometimes, say if you're making a graphic novel, the writing and the words of a graphic novel have no value without art, because it is then not a graphic novel. So you would probably want to make it contingent upon having, contributor, an artist, hammering all that out before you make contracts. Same thing with the children's book, It's one thing to have an author come to you and say, I have this really great script, and for you to agree that it is a really great script. It is another thing for you to be but I have no idea who would illustrate it, or I don't have those relationships, or, etc. Because a children's book is only as good, similarly, as a graphic novel in its finished work, and both elements rely upon each other very heavily, so you don't really have a piece of IP until you have the finished work. And so for those reasons, you kind of want to chain them to each other. And then similarly, even if you have a co-authored book, or even if it's a nonfiction book and you need two different kind of experts, same sort of deal, where it becomes really hard to strip out the work of one person without the other. So it's kind of contingent upon the finished work. So, typically what you do is you look at, the money, which is everybody's favorite part to argue about.
Oh, well, favorite part to argue about, yes.
And then you look at what is fair, which is the most nebulous and arbitrary ruling that maybe ever could be. And then you sort of say, well, this person is doing the bulk of the work in terms of material hours. And you say, this person is contributing the bulk of the work that has the greatest leverage. The person that comes up with the concept and the, sort of the value proposition of the book is the most valuable part, because it doesn't matter how good the art is, it doesn't matter how good the writing is, if the book is worthless, if nobody reads the book, So you want to sort of take those two factors to weigh, and then split the advance and the royalty based on what the contributors are materially contributing in a way that doesn't make the book fundamentally infeasible from the start, And so that, and you've done this before.
Oh, yeah, you're right. This isn't totally new to me. I'm just waking up.
Okay. But so those are the primary considerations, is like what value is each person contributing, what amount of labor is each person contributing, what is fair compensation based on that, and in any contract, you really want to look at like best case scenario, worst case scenario, most likely scenario. And so part of that too is then, sometimes most people in our world, dare I say, are thoughtful, polite people, and they say, oh, like, I'm doing most of the work, but I'll take half, or let's just split it down the middle. And that, that seems fine. In many cases, if the work is close to equal, or it's intended to be close to equal, sometimes you'll need a clause that is like, if one person ends up going over, then this does change later. But you'll need a like very definable metric, so it's not just like one person feels like they did more work than the other person, because that does not really fly.
So from a practical perspective, do you write up one contract and have both people sign it, or do you write up a separate contract for each of them?
So, and there's two kinds of properties here. So there's like the property where the work is so inherently chained together that it can't be separated. Like you would file the copyright on the finished work rather than like each person's individual contributions, because like alone they are not a creative work. Versus the kind of project where, it's like spot illustrated by one person and written by another person. Like the book is still valuable without, or you could like literally bring in a whole new spot illustrator. It would give it a very different feel and all that, but it wouldn't.
Or you could use those illustrations for a different project.
Yeah, you wouldn't like fundamentally dismantle the worth and or value proposition of the work. And that's kind of how you have to look at it, is like who came up with it, what is the material value of each person's contribution, and so, but you don't want to have it, or I guess in some cases you do create the agreement in the way where you have the person you have an agreement with, and then they have agreements with other people down chain.
All right, they're like subcontracting.
Yeah, and so that's, so you say like, we would like to give you $10 million, but in reality that we live in, this is like what we will reasonably expect to earn from this. So this is like what we can do for you.
We definitely, yeah. I know of one situation where we have people working together on multiple projects, and in one situation we have a contract with one of them, and that person subcontracts to the other. In the other situation we have the contract with both of them, which is a little confusing. I wouldn't recommend that one that way necessarily.
Consistency is key, typically in life, and mostly just so because you don't want impropriety, or worse, the appearance of impropriety, or not quite worst, but like almost as bad confusion that leads people to start to question the appearance of impropriety.
It makes sense.
So it's like, it's not just about being above board, it's about communicating well enough that everybody understands that things were thought about, like it's not like everybody's individual definition of fair will absolutely vary, and you can't really.
But if you're consistent and you have a policy to fall back on, I think that is super smart. Also, it helps you stay organized, because being organized about contracts is really helpful to, paying royalties and
absolutely
finding out what the contract says 5 years later when someone asks.
Right. And like having, because this is the hardest thing to like explain to somebody, is you're like, there just isn't a lot of money in books. Like, you're not making a Hollywood film, So we're paying you what we can pay you, and then, from there, we, if we'd go above and beyond, then you make more money, and, this is how that money is distributed, But it's what we run into a lot is, somebody contributed one illustration to a book, and then doesn't understand why they don't receive continued residuals on that. Or in one case, we had an artist that, did a catalog cover, and when we underprinted the catalog and had to reprint the catalog, the artist demanded receiving a second payment because they were under the impression that the catalog had to be reprinted, not because we had underprinted it, but because the cover was so good that we had gone through that many more tens of thousands of catalogs.
So yeah, it's good to have it clear in your contract whether or not they get paid royalties and blah blah blah.
Yeah. So, and and so again, it's communication and being firm, but having some transparency. Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at Microcosm.
On Facebook at Microcosm Publishing.
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.